Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl. Welcome to Get Used to It. This is our show in which we feature issues about the gay and lesbian community, but it's obviously for all of you. We're happy that you're here. Today I have two wonderful guests to talk about an issue of people in the gay and lesbian community who have been working all their lives in film or television or doing the written word. May have started out writing for our community or making product for our community, but in many cases have been called upon to either expand or change their horizons. And we're going to talk today about what's the better way, why do we do these things. My two guests are Jan Oxenberg, who is a writer-producer for Once and Again, ABC's award-winning show, and Michael Kearns, who is a performance artist, a producer, director, actor, well known, I think, around our country, both of them. Welcome. Jan, I want to start with you. We first probably heard about you in the community a number of years ago. This sort of fabulous, radical, wild lesbian filmmaker who was making films about and for the lesbian community that everybody saw, everybody loved. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you started out making films and why you decided to kind of work from your own life forward, as it were.
Well, I guess I always wanted to do something visual. I was in college in New York, and I decided to do my thesis as a comic book. And but the unfortunate thing is that I have no artistic ability whatsoever. I can't draw. I can never stay in the lines of the coloring book. And so I was working with someone on this thesis that I was doing, who was the cartoonist. But of course I had no money to pay this person, and they decided to do something else, like go to a Grateful Dead concert or something. And somehow that all led to my coming out to California to go to Cal Arts and start using a camera to do the visuals.
Now, had you done filmmaking at home or just amateur stuff? I mean, I'm always interested to know why people choose a particular, especially something where it's not just we're standing up and acting or talking. I mean, where you have to actually know how to operate some piece of equipment.
Yeah, it's weird actually that I did, because I come from a family that is completely incompetent in any mechanical or technical area. I mean, you know, it's like if we ran out of toilet paper, they would call the plumber. I mean, it was really bad. But in high school, I got a Super 8 camera, and I went around and obnoxiously filmed all my friends, and I seem to still be doing that, actually.
Now, did you identify as a lesbian when you were that young in high school, or not till you got out to California, or when did this start?
Well, that all depends on what you mean by identify.
Yes, that's true. Well, let's say to yourself, first of all.
Eeks! Well, I knew on one level that I was a lesbian in high school. I sort of couldn't avoid it since I had these very wonderful erotic dreams every night, pretty much, about my fellow cheerleaders. But unfortunately, none of this was actually manifested in action until a few years later. So, you know, I knew, but I was not out in any way, and I was pretty scared about it.
So the first film that you ever made, what was the subject matter?
Coming out.
Huh.
I went to Cal Arts, and I got involved with Judy Chicago. She had this thing called the Feminist Art Program. And the ethos, you know, at that time, and this is in the 70s, was women doing artwork drawn from our own lives, and everything had to be a circle. You know, it was that whole... But it, you know, I'm being a little facetious, but it really did influence me and free me to do something that came from deep inside. And I made a short film called Home Movie. It was an autobiographical film about coming out. And the reason it's called Home Movie is that I used a couple of old home movies in it, one of which was of me being a high school cheerleader, and the other one was my mother sort of training me to follow in her footsteps. I was imitating all her motherly duties. And that's the first film I made. It's been shown all over the world now, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because not everybody's first film is shown all over the world. I mean, true.
I was a good cheerleader.
Obviously. Had you come out to your mother before you made this film?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to do that. Yeah. Actually, well, that's not entirely true. I had sort of come out to her by accident on the way to the airport. She said something about, who I was dating, and I said something vague about, well, I hinted that there were women involved in the dating scene. And I remember her the very first words out of her mouth were, there are other methods of birth control, Jan. So, but we never, it just got dropped. And in fact, I sort of used the film to come out to my parents. Not to mention the other cheerleaders.
So how was the film seen? I mean, how did it get around for people to see?
Well, let's see, I guess. Oh, and I got an A in the class, I should say.
I'll bet.
There were some beginnings of a, women's/lesbian culture. Film showings and people singing and reading poetry, and the film started I went around with it to a lot of different places all over the country. And of course I didn't know any film reviewers. I mean, I was very young. I was like 20, 21, something. So actually, I asked my mother to write a review of the film for our publicity material. She wrote, Home Movie is sensitive and well made. I think my daughter Jan is a very talented filmmaker, and I hope she goes on to some other subjects.
But that was very generous of her, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
And did you go on to other subjects? I don't think so, at least not right away.
Not for a while.
What came next?
I was still in film school. I made another a film called A Comedy in Six Unnatural Acts. And that was a half-hour film. It was a takeoff on stereotyped images of lesbians. And each scene was also a spoof of a different genre of Hollywood film that a lot of these stereotypes have come from. And I guess by that time, Home Movie had, sort of come to the attention of whatever independent film community was out there and festivals and so on. And so both of those films, I went to many film festivals in this country and Europe and all over, and a lot of people saw them.
Yes, a lot of people saw them. I don't think I know anyone in the community that didn't see it. And it really struck a chord, I think, with, certainly with lesbians. I mean, I really have no idea if it was seen outside of,
Well, I want to say something about that because, at that time, there was a lot of debate in the community about, should we be trying to educate the straight world? My opinion about that, and this is what I really tried to do in my films, was to make films for us that were authentic expressions of our community and make them available to the rest of the world. Sort of like what you said in your introduction to this show. Mm-hmm. So I was not trying to put on a good face or convince someone that, we were okay and great and all that. I was trying to feed this hunger of our own community for authentic images and let everybody else see it.
Well, I think it's interesting, you know, once you, of course, do a work of art, it no longer really belongs to you. The interpretation, everything is really much more in the eye of the beholder, and that's where I think it gets a great deal of its power. You can't control it, you don't want to control it, and the authenticity of it absolutely reached out to everyone I knew, and lots of folks I didn't know, who felt as though by saying that the straight world had these wrong ideas about us, and that we were almost captured by those straight images, to see something saying, you don't have to be. It was a very strong message, I think, you know, to lesbians. And that's part of the power, really, of film and, you know, the other media.
But I was also I wasn't trying to say, oh, here's a stereotype, you know, of this like butch dyke. You know, oh, we're not like that, we're really just normal people. I was trying to celebrate the strength in some of those stereotyped images while ridiculing the absurdity of some of them. Mm-hmm. You know, like there's one of the scenes was called Child Molester, you know, and had this woman in a Girl Scout uniform trying to, you know, lure little girls with Girl Scout cookies. So it wasn't like, we're nice, we're, you know, we're going to be just like you. It was, get used to it.
Well, it's one of the reasons I wanted, obviously, to have both of you on the show at the same time is because that's much of the impression that I got from your work as well, Michael. Tell us a little bit about sort of the early Michael Kearns work and what you had in mind and why you decided that performance was a strong way to make a statement in the world.
Well, I was out in the beginning of the 70s, actually, as a gay man, and I just found more comfort in terms of being an actor if I wasn't in this camouflage mode, if I wasn't denying who I was. I felt that the purity of my work gained momentum by my being openly gay, to myself, to the people around me. So that, you know, dictated to a certain extent how I was going to negotiate this career, and I played a lot of gay roles, and I did a lot of gay theater and became identified with that. People are still waiting for me to tell a different story. Well, that's actually funny, though, because people would constantly say to me, oh, is it another gay play? As if there was only one type of gay man, which I thought was so interesting. Would they say, oh, is it another straight play to Neil Simon? And then when I started...
Maybe they should.
Exactly. Well, you've got a point there. Then when I started doing a lot of HIV/AIDS theater or works about that, the question then started coming, oh, is it another AIDS play? So I find it interesting. I'm sort of reverberating from a lot of what Jan said. I mean, I think that one of the expressions she avoided, which we all want to avoid, is politically correct. I mean, she wasn't setting out to do politically correct work, and nor have I ever set out to do politically correct work, because for one thing, there's no drama in it. There's no stakes. It's not about politically correct work is bland and boring, and there's nothing to it. But I think that the irony here is that by being your most authentic, by being your most honest, you become your most universal. And I think that that's a very difficult lesson to teach someone. That's what I try to teach any beginning writer or actor, is that, you know, the thing that you are the most afraid of telling is your greatest gift. The thing that you think is the most shocking, secretive, darkest shadow part of yourself is your money-making for the rest of your life. It's what will make you a star. It's what will put you on the map. And that's what I'm just trying to convince people of. I mean, those are the things that I learned. And my road has been a difficult one just because of the time frame. I came out earlier than a lot of people. And I think that it had a great effect on the course of my career. I'm not complaining. And, you know, after speaking to you the other day, I actually kind of thought about it, and I thought, you know, it wasn't necessarily my being noble that kept me on this road. It was partly just my being practical. In other words, I had to make a living. The TV and movie industry wasn't hiring me, so I sort of had to create my own niche. I had to create my own work. But in the long run, am I grateful? Yes. Would I have had it any other way? No. It's all been fine. If I had been born 10 years later, 15 years later, I may have gone back and forth in both of those worlds more than I have. But it's all fine.
Well, but it's also interesting to me because we use the word hunger, that the community, and there really wasn't a community early on. It was a lot of people in the closet who were maybe testing the waters of coming out, or really sort of crossing over from what they had been to being radically different and running off to Hollywood, San Francisco, wherever. And people, I think young people still are, to escape what they were and become what they think they truly are. And there was nothing for us to look at. I mean, there was nothing, in a way, except for, there's always been kind of ghetto theater, and I'm not saying that's what you were doing, but it is an important piece of people's experience with the arts. And I think, Michael, you have continued, but you started out doing stuff about gay men. And after not just diagnosed with HIV, but AIDS, you, I won't say expanded, but you began to include other people in your one-person show.
Which was pretty fascinating.
Tell me a little bit then.
Well, considering that through the sort of 70s, I was constantly, even on television, cast as a gay man because I was openly gay, and the imagination of people in television was, oh, well, he's a gay man, well, we'll cast him as a gay man, and not cast me as much else. Then when AIDS came along, the fascinating thing was here I played all these sort of gay men, and within a certain small range. But with AIDS, then I made the decision, having read script after script after script about the white gay male story, I thought somebody has to address the other issues here. There are other people who have HIV, there are other people dying, there are other communities that need to be depicted, that need to express themselves. So I started researching and wound up doing, 12 different characters, many of whom were blazingly heterosexual, some of whom were black, some of whom were female. So I wound up doing this extreme character work as an actor, which I had never done. But I go back to my saying, by being my most authentic for all those years and not being encumbered by the closet and encumbered by fear, that paved the way for me to suddenly blossom with this work that was totally universal. And I was able to, just because I had the freedom to play a woman, to play a straight man, to play a black person, because my instrument, just my physical and vocal instrument, was so, it had reached a level of purity by doing that work, not censoring, denying, being afraid of talking in a deep voice or making my legs go in a certain direction. I was a free actor. And then I was able to catapult that freedom into playing all these roles. So it's really interesting.
And has there been any bewilderment by people in the community as you moved from, from what they saw as your authentic you to including these other characters?
I think just shocked that I could do it. I mean, I think there was just, I was sort of thought of as this, kind of guy who could act these gay parts, and oh, he's amusing and funny. But when I did intimacies, I think people went, there's more to him. And there was more to me, that I was somehow strangling myself. I was unable to express it. But until we say, I have a right to express this, I have a right to be in the mainstream, I have a right as an openly gay man to play heterosexual roles, even leading man roles, unless somebody takes that stance and makes that move forward, it ain't gonna happen. I mean, we'll continue to be victimized by our own victimization and by our own image of ourselves.
Well, and to some extent, I mean, I think this also happened to you, although I didn't really know you in those years.
I've never played a leading man. I hope
It's
to.
about time.
And your life's not over yet, is it?
I mean, on camera. No.
I understand. But tell us what happened after Six Unnatural Acts.
The 7th.
And what was the 7th?
Yeah, I'm on the 200th right now. Well, let's see. I moved to New York, and I sort of got into doing a film that I never would have planned to do if I had any idea what it was going to turn into. I shot some documentary footage of my grandmother and my family around the time that my grandmother was ill. It started out, I just did an audio tape, just to have something of her. And one thing led to another. I was in New York, sort of being a struggling independent filmmaker, which meant that I knew a lot of other struggling filmmakers who would work for me for free, basically, as I did for them. And I ended up shooting documentary footage before my grandmother died and after, of the family and her friends, sort of going through the whole craziness of saying goodbye and mourning and family dynamics. And I had no idea what I was going to do with this footage. I had been able to get grants based on the short lesbian films that I had done. And, to make a long story short, I ended up, after a while, I wrote a script that incorporated the documentary footage into a narrative. And I created a character, a cardboard cutout of a scowling 5-year-old who sort of represented my point of view. And she, in the script, goes on a journey to find out what happened to Grandma and to figure out how to say goodbye and to try to answer all the great unanswerable questions that these events have raised. Everything from why did Grandma have to die to why didn't she teach my mother how to cook? And that turned into this feature film, Thank You and Good Night, that ended up being primarily financed by American Playhouse, the great public television series that nurtured so much incredible, independent film work and theater. And so I sort of began this odyssey. It took many years to finish that film. And that, I guess you could say it took me in a different direction in the sense that the subject matter was not being a lesbian, but the form of it was actually very related to the first film that I did. It had this sort of personal narrative.
It was nominated, wasn't it?
No.
I thought it was.
So it should have been.
Well, it should have been.
It definitely should have been.
Wow.
But it was a big hit at Sundance. And
Well, I have seen the film. I mean, it's incredibly
I want
moving.
to see it.
And I don't know that anyone at the time would have said, Jan, why are you doing this instead of more lesbian films? I mean, I don't know. Did people say this to you in the time that you were sort of taking and working on this?
I don't think I felt that kind of pressure. I always felt within myself that I was not, I was not negating the fact that I was an out lesbian doing films, that I absolutely felt that I would, in the future, do other works that would have lesbian themes, as I have done and as I am doing now. So, I didn't really feel conflicted about it. The only thing I really felt conflicted about was whether to make a point in the film that I was a lesbian. Because, as I said, it had this documentary footage of the family. And, that was a kind of tricky thing, because on the one hand, it didn't really, there wasn't a way in which it organically was part of the footage that I had shot or the way that the film was. I would have had to have made a very conscious decision that I want to put the word lesbian on anywhere I have a chance. I have like a little rubber stamp. I just put lesbian, 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 on like the cereal boxes at Gelson's or something. But that's my mission in life. But on the other hand, I had been, in a way that is a good thing to do. We are everywhere. I mean, here is a chance. I have this chance to make this work, and maybe I should shoehorn it in, even if it's with a shoehorn. And I didn't. I guess the closest it comes is there's a little dialogue between my grandmother and I where I say, what do you want me to do? What do you wish for me? She says, well, I want you to get married. And I say, well, do you have a second choice? She says, yes, I'd like to see you go on a quiz show.
Or get married on a quiz show in these days.
That's a possibility.
Exactly.
So how do you get from independent filmmaking to writing for Chicago Hope, for where you are now, writing and producing? I mean, it seems, I think, to most people like a really different thing. And I guess people would say, what did you have to give up, to do this, Jan?
Who did I sleep with?
Well, I suppose that would be a good question now in the industry, wouldn't it?
I want to know.
Me too.
If only. Well, what happened is that Thank You and Goodnight took a long time to get finished, so much longer than I ever thought it would, because it was just such a strange film. It had every buzzword that would make someone not want to finance a film. It had, death, grandmother, cancer, it was cardboard cutouts, And people really liked the script, but it was always like, wow, I really want to see this when it's finished. Anyway, so by the time it was finished, I was so broke. And I had been like a heroin addict. For all those years, any money I could get my hands on went into this film. And it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and I felt that I really wanted to go in both directions. I wanted to, if the film, had some sort of success, I wanted to use that to do more mainstream work while also continuing to do independent films. So out of Sundance, I got an agent. The film got a theatrical distributor.
Right.
And I went to Hollywood.
And,
well, actually, I was hoping, my plan almost worked, because at this very same time, when I got the agent, I came out to LA, I had an idea for a romantic comedy, I pitched it around town, I had never done anything vaguely like that before. And amazingly, I actually sold it like almost immediately to Gina Davis, her company. And she wanted me to direct it. She had loved Thank You and Goodnight. So I thought, oh, that was easy.
What year was this?
This would be like 92, maybe, something like that. I was very naive about how things happen. But at the same time, so I was writing this romantic comedy for Gina Davis, but I also sold an idea for a film to American Playhouse to do another film with them that was a fiction film, but had a lesbian story. And this to me was like the perfect, well, neither of them got made.
oops.
But I did continue selling, pitches to studios and writing movies. And I guess what happened is that with the lesbian film that I was going to make for American Playhouse, I took it to the Sundance Writers Lab, which is part of Sundance where they sort of nurture independent directors and producers and writers. And while I was there, I met a man named Jason Katims, who was working with Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz when they, and Winnie Holtzman when they did the show My So-Called Life.
Right.
Which is a wonderful show. And after a couple of years, when I was doing quite well, as many writers in Hollywood, you know, can be very successful and have nothing that they've written ever made, which is sort of this existential horror show. You know, and that was sort of happening with me. I was writing all these scripts, and they, for one reason or another, you know, they weren't very typical. We were ready to go into production on the American Playhouse, the lesbian film, and then American Playhouse ceased to exist. So Jason, working with Ed and Marshall, started a show called Relativity, which was on ABC, and asked me if I wanted to write for it. And I was so frustrated, you know, sitting in my little room writing things that weren't getting made, that I thought, well, I'll try, you know, let me try this. This should be interesting. And it was a great treat that Jason had made one of the major characters a lesbian in that show. So I was working for mainstream television, but getting to write actually the first romantic lesbian kiss on network television, a little bit before Ellen did her wonderful show.
Well, it's, Michael, we were talking the other day about, both of us actually, all of us were talking about some of our colleagues who are in the industry, who are acting or, you know, writing or directing, which is even easier to do, I suppose, if you're gay, many of whom are now feeling perfectly safe about coming out, but most of whom have not really acted or written or directed in sort of a gay genre, theater or television or films. Do you think it makes a difference in terms of sort of both how they are with themselves as artists? And I guess my other question has to do with what the community, in terms of how it sees people. Would they, you know, because most of them are just working in a straight world and might play a gay character or might write a gay character without having spent any of their time in sort of our gay culture working. Do you think it makes a difference?
I want to say one other thing, just to back up. I think that people are safe unless they're a leading man.
You're right.
Leading,
absolutely.
a white leading man in film or television cannot be gay yet, or at least that's the perception.
Well, we know some leading women who haven't necessarily come out.
That's right, absolutely. I think ultimately this becomes a choice. It becomes a choice whether you want to have a politicized, a charged career in that way, if you want to dance in both worlds, or if you don't want to do that. I think it's as different as personality. And I think just because somebody is lesbian or gay or black or whatever doesn't necessarily mean they're going to gravitate to a political voice. I happen to fit that, and it fit me, and that's the way I've lived my life. I do, however, what I do think is important, and I think that Jan addressed this again beautifully, is that you need to somehow reconcile these issues with yourself if you are going to create good art and good work. And no matter how you do that, whether you maybe do one or two of these shows a year or you have some input, I think that the denial aspect and self-denial does not equal good art. And I think that that's what, of course, the movie about her grandmother reflected, whether subtly or not, it reflected who she is. And being a lesbian might have been a very teensy part of that painting, but it's still there because she had accepted herself and embraced that. And I think that that's what's so important about this whole thing.
Well, one of the things I think we have, it occurs to me in the political world. When I was first elected, and I was the first open gay or lesbian person to be elected in the California legislature, people wondered, oh, is she going to do just, you know, gay legislation? And like, you get 50 bills a year, like you could think of 2 maybe, you know, and fight those through if possible. And the rest has to be of necessity. There's just other things that you need to make laws about, not because I wanted to deny that we needed something in the community, but there was more that I could do. and more that I thought I should do. But it also sometimes felt like I need to show them that I'm not just the lesbian, legislator. And of course it turned out to be a nice balance because I got to do everything. But it really did occur to me that there would have been less work for our community in the legislature had I not been there. That the authenticity of speaking to my legislation or thinking of what needed to be done even was important. It's not just role modeling, that's not what I'm talking about, but the knowing piece and doing for the community. And I don't think in art necessarily it just divides nicely, but there are some things that are made for our community. They're shown at film festivals, the Gay Film Festival, and that's the only place you ever see them. And it's important. The community needs it. And I guess I'm trying to hear from you because I don't know that many people choose to do art only for our community and in our community. It almost feels like even you, Michael, say, I don't know, maybe early on if somebody gave me a choice, I'm not sure I would have done this.
Right.
So I guess part of the question is, isn't it important to have this culture, which is ours, in which people work? And how do we maintain that if it's not really valued or valued enough?
Well, that's the age-old question that every, so-called minority group faces. I mean, Jews, blacks, whatever. Do you want to maintain a separate culture, or how to mix maintaining your own culture with, being part of the outside world, and everyone's fears of being homogenized into, the Disney culture? That I agree. I mean, I think that to have us, well, then you get into, are we a culture, or were we simply a ghetto? Mm-hmm. Were we simply, I mean, I probably have more Jewish cultural attributes from growing up in my family than I have lesbian or gay attributes from growing up as a closeted gay person.
Exactly.
And yet, I think that to make art that is so specific that it comes at universality from that angle, as you were saying, it would be a great loss for people to stop doing that.
And I think they won't stop doing that. I mean, it's interesting, I was reading in the paper today about sort of the growth of interest in poetry slams.
Right.
And how interesting that is, and how really individual and authentic, I think, the voices are, at least it seemed to me from the articles and from what I've heard, how authentic the voices are. Now, who knows if these people will be poets, much less, writers, who will then be sort of widely heard and have to think about, do I write other things? I mean, you're writing gay and lesbian characters. Would they be in the shows for which you write if you weren't there?
Well, I sort of made it, a little mission or something to get a gay character on all the shows I worked on. Jason was a close friend of mine, and he put this lesbian character in the show, and maybe even influenced by his friendship with me. So, it was that was easy. But I've been very lucky that I did the show Nothing Sacred, which was about a sort of radical Catholic priest. Not an obvious place you'd find a lesbian. And actually what I was able to do there was I did an episode about abortion in which the church secretary has an abortion. And I didn't realize this until I did the show, but this was the first time since the 70s that a regular character in a primetime series had an abortion. Wow. Isn't that amazing? It was Maude in the 70s.
Wow.
Right.
And I think Party of Five had a storyline about the Neve Campbell character having an abortion, and she decided to have an abortion, and then I think per studio notes, on the way to the abortion clinic, she had a miscarriage. But on our show, the girl had an abortion, and the priest dealt with it, and it was funny because that show was created by a Jesuit priest, Bill Kane, and he worked closely with me on the episode. He had a lot at stake because he's an active priest. You know, this was very dicey for him to be doing this. And we would have these, heated debates about what could be in the script and what couldn't be in the script. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "Oh, you're just saying that because you're a radical lesbian feminist Jew and I'm a male Catholic priest."
Well, the issue of identity, I was at a hate crimes conference or anti-hate crimes conference last night. It was just people in the community in the San Fernando Valley, probably 150 of them, gotten together. There have been 5 of these town halls now where they don't know exactly what to do about it. And one woman, of course, predictably, stood up and said, why do we have to be identified by this or that, by race or religion or whatever? And of course the answer is we don't identify ourselves necessarily that way. It's when other people say you are a dirty fill in the blank that we're the ones that are separated out. But I wonder, there's a certain stigma attached, certainly for actors, I think, Michael, and you tell me, because we have a number of friends and colleagues who may be out in their personal lives, but would, I think, be a little worried if they were only playing gay characters. Do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely, and I think that stigma we have to end that stigma somehow, and I don't know how that's going to happen. I mean, I suppose it'll happen when the first leading man actor in television or film says he's gay and continues to be able to work and not lose work playing heterosexual roles.
Do you think that'll happen?
I hope so. I mean, I feel like all this screaming and yelling I've done will be in vain unless it doesn't happen. I mean, it isn't going to be me, but there's somebody out there who I believe can. I mean, I think it's ridiculous. Acting is about acting. It's not about who you are when you go home and what you do in bed behind closed doors. And that argument is ridiculous, that we're not going to believe them if we know that. That means that we believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger's knocked off a few people at the 7-Eleven before he goes to the studio. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Let's hope he has, I did. But it's still the same thing with race. I mean, you have an African-American man doing Romeo and Juliet, and people are still talking about how unusual that is, and have to comment, on it.
It's back to what we were saying earlier. I think that we're in such a state of evolution here, and that we almost can't keep up with these concepts. Also, we're in a state, literally California, where there's such a high premium placed on stardom and fame and money. Of course there needs to be a respect for people who want to act gay and lesbian theater in their basement or on their street corner, and they shouldn't be belittled or minimized. Their voices need to be heard and need to be expressed as much as anybody else's. But I think that, I often say to students who are going to try to be actors, I say at some point you have to decide, do you want to be a star? That's fine. Or do you want to be a great actor? Or do you want to be both? Because if you want to be both, you're going to have to do a real dance. But that's fair. But you have to sort of decide these things. Or do you want to be a political creature who is also an actor, like I've been? But again, it goes back to choice. How much money do you want to make? Are you comfortable not living in Beverly Hills? Are you comfortable not making a living and working somewhere else to make money to do gay theater the rest of your life? I honor you and applaud you and think you're a fabulous person for making that decision. But too often I think these people are derided, sort of looked at askance, not respected. Unless you're, with the thing that people say, if you say you're an actor, they say, well, what have I seen you in? Well, you can't say in my school play where I was a proud gay person. You have to say at Academy, you have to say I was in Traffic, and it had to be the movie that was the hit last week, or you're nothing. That's where society is so wacko in terms of fame, and where we don't value art, we value fame.
So does it seem different now, though? I mean, in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, there seemed to be at least this kind of thumb your nose at the success notion anyway. Being independent, not doing that was a good thing. It's not the case now in the aughts. And, or at least I'm not sure if it is. Are there, I mean, independent filmmakers are much more revered, I think, now, because you can actually get distributed. And a lot of the films that people are going to see are independent films, but they're still mainstream themed films.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that somehow it became cool to be rich.
Yeah, how did that happen?
When it's cool to be rich, there is no such thing as cool anymore. It's all a corporate commodity. There is no Bohemian culture. I mean, maybe rap is the closest to it, which really was a very grassroots. I mean, I remember going to Coney Island when I lived in Brooklyn in the early '80s, and seeing some rap performance, on the boardwalk before it became anything in the mainstream. It wasn't anything that people were doing to have a big record deal, with Def Jam or something like that. It is probably, I mean, whatever you think of the content of it, that's another discussion, but it was an art form that was completely specific to a community,
right,
that was made available to the general public and became part of the mainstream. On a certain level, that's kind of a model for what can happen. I mean, it's all very complicated about what the values are that made it popular.
Right.
But I think that there are two sides to the coin. That the fact that we succeeded, we won. The mainstream culture, there's Will and Grace is in the top 10. I mean, it's incredible. I'm doing a project with Melissa Etheridge for HBO, a movie that's a lesbian love story, that's a musical. I don't have to go off and be an quote-unquote independent filmmaker to make the lesbian film that's going to, I hope, end up being exactly the way we want it to be. Two out lesbians working on it. So in that sense, rather than bemoaning this fact, I think we should be celebrating it as a victory.
No, I don't think bemoaning is what, you're right. I mean, I don't think bemoaning is what we were talking of doing. Although it's interesting when you talk about Melissa or, Katie Lang or any of the of our sort of musical stars who have been embraced much more broadly, really, for their talent. It's still stars who will be, I mean, this project might happen because Melissa will do it. Do you know what I mean? And therefore there'd be some interest in it because the mainstream has embraced her, and therefore that in its own way becomes a touchstone.
Well, that's the way all films get made.
Right.
I mean, If These Walls Could Talk Too, that the lesbian themed show, that really got done because Sharon Stone decided that she wanted to be in it, and she was going to be in bed with Ellen DeGeneres, and so
And yet the Vanessa Redgrave section of it was the most poignant, the most talked about afterward and continuously, probably the most admired, if I might say so, because it was in its own way the most authentic. It wasn't embarrassed about itself.
Right.
Which is also a kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Michael's work, but talk about not being embarrassed about itself. I mean, it's literally stunning. I mean, I haven't
seen your work. I can't wait.
Can't talk to him afterward because you're so stunned. I mean, it's so moving. And are you doing another show, Michael? I mean, I know you're a dad with a little girl now, and that takes a lot of your time.
That takes a lot of my energy. So I'm more writing and teaching, and which feels good. I can make my impact there too.
So would you have advice then? I mean, I guess it's sort of funny in a way, but there are probably quite a number of young people who are out, who are in high school or graduated from high school, either in college or, out working in the world, who think that they would like to do something. And they're facing the same thing. Is there a place, first of all, for them to do anything in the community and for the community that you know about? I mean, how do you get to be in a theater?
I think that almost every major city now has some sort of gay and lesbian theater, and I think that it probably will continue to. I think that in terms of advice, I just go back to that: be true to yourself, and also don't compare. That's the biggest thing that I constantly tell people. Don't compare your career to someone else's career. It's your career, and it's your journey.
Don't read Variety or the Hollywood Reporter.
If you can help it. But you can drive yourself crazy. And you know, there's great acting, gay, straight, or otherwise, in church basements. You know, all over the country probably. There's wonderful art in poetry readings that 5 people attend. There's brilliant poetry, maybe as brilliant. It doesn't necessarily have to be mass marketed or corporately endorsed to be good art. And I think that that's the message I'd like people to go away with. And on the other hand, also, there's nothing wrong with being a star and making a lot of money and being a big success and being gay and lesbian. Nothing wrong with that either. But we're sort of in both worlds now. And this is not only true of gays and lesbians, this is true of the entire planet in terms of how we're going to negotiate these changes that are here, and the perception of art and money and success and all those things. I mean, I think we're all in this together, but it may be a little bit more pronounced when you're a minority, or when you've been undervalued or swept away or not listened to.
Well, I feel, in terms of advice, I would contact one of the gay film festivals around the country. Many of them have a lot of resources for gay and lesbian film, you know, sort of fledgling grant programs, and it's a way to network and meet people and be encouraged. I mean, look at how many films are in these gay and lesbian film festivals.
That's true.
I mean, it's not exactly like people have said, "Oh, I'm gonna be a successful star, whatever, in Hollywood," and nobody's doing this work. People obviously have a desire to work from what's important to them that doesn't seem to go away. It seems to be magnified by having more acceptance and maybe more resources to make it happen.
And I think the other piece of that is that we want to make certain that we support it too. You know, that I think people are less afraid these days to go to a lesbian film for, you know, everybody's going to be taking their pictures and putting it on the FBI internet or whatever. That it's really important to get that variety in your own life, you know, to attend these performances, to go to these films. That it's a wonderful experience as an audience as well. So, well, here's the interesting thing. We've completely gone through a whole hour together already.
Wow.
I know, it's fast, isn't it? I hope it was as fast for the audience as it was for us. So I want to thank you very, very much, as always,
Thank you.
for doing
Thank you.
this. I think it's fun to catch up with people who are doing what you're doing and have contributed as much to our lives as the two of you have. Thank you very much for being with us as well. I think you should take this advice, you know, make that film, write that poem, go sing somewhere, be a success or not as you like, but as far as gay and lesbian content out there in the media, I think America's just going to have to get used to it.